Okay, welcome back, Dr. D. I'm excited today to hear a little bit more about your theory of intellectual virtues and all the various studies you have around this concept.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kate. Great to be here with you today and talking about intellectual virtues. It's a topic that's very important to me. And basically, my entire life has been sort of, I guess, in a very nerdy way, dedicated to this topic, even though I didn't even define it that way until recently. My life took me through philosophy, of course, as we talked about, and in philosophy, basically, the theory of knowledge, if you will, has a very technical sounding term that they use to describe it. It's called epistemology, and epistemology is just simply the study of the theory of knowledge, and it's been going on for 2,000 years, and so it's something that I was very curious about because as I went through my undergraduate days, I recognized that people had all these different beliefs about things. And I thought that if I studied science, that somehow or other, I would just find, some kind of a pathway, some kind of avenue that would take me to some kind of absolute truth or a method or a methodology or something that would lead to being able to say to somebody, you're just absolutely wrong about that, right? I don't know why I needed to do that, but that was kind of the nerdy path that I was on. And so my undergraduate was in physics and chemistry and all that kind of stuff. And then I just thought, this is interesting. But even in the physics and chemistry, there's a lot of sort of discord. There's a lot of different ideas and theories about the way things are and what is what is actually a good theory versus a bad theory. And I thought, well, the only thing that I can think of that I'll need to do in order to kind of get behind all this is study philosophy, which took me into epistemology and the theory of knowledge and all that kind of stuff. So I went to the University of Minnesota specifically to study that. And as I got into the various theories that were primarily in what we call the philosophy of science, I recognized that this is just going to go on forever, that there's never going to be any end to this, that we're splitting hairs in so many ways. It's just incredible. And so I just had to find a way out of this because there was just, I recognized probably within a semester or two of being a grad student at the University of Minnesota that, in fact, the philosophy of science was never going to end, that they were just, one person would come up with a new perspective and somebody else would refute it. And it was just going to go on and on and on. So I had to find a way out of this. And thankfully, because I was kind of, again, this library rat. I was just spending time in the library, reading things that weren't recommended by my faculty, but that took me off in different directions and actually helped me solve for myself the problem, which was the discovery of American pragmatism, which basically doesn't believe that somehow or other the world wants us to speak a certain vocabulary, that the world doesn't have a preset vocabulary that we can use, and that rather knowledge is a function of what it does for us and utility that it has for us. And so I was kind of as a result of getting involved in American pragmatism and writing both my master's thesis and my PhD thesis on basically with that as a background, I was ready for a new movement in epistemology, and here it came along. I had left, philosophy and became an academic in business schools and so on. But, I keep track of what's happening. And then lo and behold, here comes this whole new genre of writing that is basically what they call virtue epistemology. And virtue epistemology says that knowledge, they finally acknowledge that we're not going to have an end. We're not going to find this holy grail, the instruction book that tells us exactly who we are and exactly the way the world wants us to describe it. And that rather knowledge is something that is being transformed constantly by the human species and by individuals. And that by directing our lives and guiding our lives in certain ways, that we're more likely to discover useful kinds of tools, vocabularies and narratives and identities and so on, that help us cope effectively with the world. And of course, the background of everything that I do is I'm for some reason I'm very interested in human flourishing, and I don't know why. Maybe because I'm still trying to flourish myself and find out what that really means. But it's legitimate in this crazy world that we're living in today, where we have all of these sources of information and all of these different perspectives, not only theological, but political and economic and everything else. Even the average person has to wonder, how do we adjudicate amongst all these various different beliefs, right? How do we come to some kind of a perspective that we can hold on our own without being dogmatic, and at the same time have tolerance of other people who look at the world completely differently than we do? And I think virtue epistemology and intellectual virtues generally is a new path forward that in fact is only recently has it become something that is seeping into our educational theory. And there's a charter school in Long Beach, as I think I've mentioned already, that it teaches young people the intellectual virtues. And there's a lot of work going on in this really esoteric area of philosophy that most people are never going to read, right? And they're writing to each other, but as a result of that, they're refining the ideas. And so people like me, who are kind of observers of the discipline, can take what's happening there and hopefully translate it to something that can be useful for people in any walk of life, right?
Amazing. So help us with the translation then of how do you define an intellectual virtue in your worldview?
Yeah, right. So a virtue, virtue, the study of virtues is something that goes back almost timeless, right? All the way back to Socrates and Plato and maybe even before that, right? And so human beings, bless their hearts, have been since we began to speak, trying to figure out how do we live our lives in a virtuous manner, in a manner that is going to either lead us to heaven or lead us to some type of nirvana here on earth. And that's reasonable, right? I mean, because we don't have an instruction book. Nobody, when you're born, says, "Oh, here's what your personality is." We don't have any kind of specifications like that. I was just taking apart a snowblower the other day, and of course, when you take apart a snowblower, you got all these specifications about this part goes there, this part, and so you know exactly how it works. But as human beings, we're kind of thrown into this world. We didn't ask to be here. We're just here, and the emotions and personality that is a function of all the various emotions that well up with inside of us is unbidden. We didn't decide that I wanted to have an anxious personality or a humorous personality. It's just something that you have, and you deal with it, and you cope with it, and you're in the world. So the virtues has kind of been rediscovered as an approach, as something that you can approach from a scientific perspective in the field of positive psychology, primarily, where they're looking at what are the virtues of human flourishing generally. And the technical definition in that literature of a virtue is a consistent positive action in the world, right? And so obviously consistent means that you do it regularly, routinely. If you wanted to be seen as a person who was honest, you wouldn't just do it when it's only convenient for you, for example. That's the easiest example, because most human beings want to be seen as an honest human being. And, and of course, we all get caught up once in a while when lo and behold, the lesser saints of our nature reveal themselves, and we cheat, and we lie to somebody, little white lies once in a while, just to avoid a conflict or whatever it might be, right? So we're not 100% honest, but generally speaking, we're consistently honest if you want to be seen as an honest human being. And then it's positive, right? In the sense that the social group that I want to identify with regards this as a positive thing, right? So honesty in most social groups is seen as a positive thing. We want people that are transparent and honest and fully disclose to us, and not holding back some information that might be helpful to resolve a conflict or whatever it might be. And then, it's action. So that means basically I decide. And, and so this is the interesting part about virtues and about free will and everything else, and human intention. And that is that basically, and I'm reading a lot of things right now, and I agree with this perspective that we really don't have free will. That in fact, our brain, our unconscious minds are generating, all these behavioral options. They're coming up to us all the time, and the only thing that we can do is that we can reflect upon them, and in many cases, we can act fast enough to stop them from occurring, right? But if you think about it, if we had to think about every little thing that we do in life, you couldn't even drive a car, because many of our behaviors become automatic. They have to be, otherwise we couldn't get through the world. And we just have to recognize that automatic behavior is just a natural part of what we are as creatures on this planet. And so we have these I call them ballistic actions that are launched into the world. And the only way that we can change them is through reflection. And so reflection happens to be one of the key intellectual virtues, because it happens both in milliseconds. As I'm reaching for something, for example, I'm constantly reflecting on whether or not my arm is going in the right direction, right? And it's not something that you're consciously thinking about, but it's happening. You're getting feedback on the ballistic action that you're taking. So it's action in the sense that upon reflection, you've made a choice to continue guiding your behavior in this way as an honest human being, or some other way, right? So you need to experience stuff and then reflect upon it. And it's so funny that we tend to reverse that in most human psychology. We want to believe that we're in control, right, of everything. And mostly we're not in control. We only in the sense that if we reflect upon what we've done, and then we have to have hope that in fact the reflection is going to lead to improved behavior in the future. And then it's in the world, right? Which means to say that it's creating consequences. So you have this reflective choice that you've made. And so you've decided, I want to be an honest person. Okay, so that's great. And now you reflect upon your behavior on a regular basis and determine whether or not you're maintaining that commitment. But at the same time, you have to realize that that's happening all the time, and you get better at it. So you get better and better at virtues, even though, from time to time, all of us are going to stumble and have some what we call, we'll backtrack a little bit on our commitments. But that's how it works, right? So you create consequences in the world through the ballistic nature of your behavior, and then you reflect upon that. And it's the reflection that leads to the refinement of behavior over a long period of time. So that's the technical definition. And I've identified 6 key intellectual virtues that I think are a good subset of the overall list of intellectual virtues that the scholars are studying, that any human being, if you kind of base your intellectual character and character development over a long period of time on these 6 intellectual virtues, that generally speaking, you will be a more agile human being. You'll be more flexible in novel situations, more different types of problem-solving strategies will just arise to you at the time that they're needed, even though you can't pre-plan. Because if you think about it, Kate, right, you're never in the same situation twice, ever. Now, we have a lot of routines in our lives, but even those routines need to be adjusted for. I mean, you walk around your house, for example, and I'm going to wear, shorts today or whatever. But the temperature is low, so I have to adjust even for ambient kinds of changes that are happening on a day-to-day basis. So the 6 essential intellectual virtues for the development of intellectual character over a lifetime are intellectual courage, intellectual humility, intellectual inquisitiveness, intellectual reflection, intellectual curiosity, and intellectual hope. And I obviously, as I mentioned before, I'm writing a book called How to Be Intelligent, and I will be outlining not only sort of the basis for these 6 key intellectual virtues, but also sort of how to develop them, both independently as standalone virtues, but also then how they integrate and how you can go about not only for yourself, but also for any kind of social group that you might be in charge of. So, for example, a lot of companies today have value systems, right? And you've seen this, and it's great. I mean, it's wonderful because it kind of tells everybody how they're supposed to behave towards one another. And typically this revolves around ethical interpersonal behaviors. But what they don't create, and they crave it, is intellectual character, right? So they're creating your ethical character, but they're not thinking about your intellectual character. And at the same time, that's what most CEOs are saying is missing from my organization. I want my people to be more agile, more flexible. I want them to be more innovative and entrepreneurial and that kind of thing. And yet, if you say toe the line on these ethical values, right, then people are still in that kind of constraining mindset that somehow or other somebody is always watching me and I have to conform to something, right? And the intellectual character is taking us in another direction.
It's something that organizations and the education system crave, but you don't hear many discussions around it. No. Why do you think that is? Why is there such a gap between what we think we need and the pathway to get there?
Right. And the reason is, I think, because we've lost track of all the work that John Dewey had done, where he was talking about making a transition from just routine acculturation, which needs to happen, right? So I look at education, the formal education system, in terms of K-16. I don't think about it as K-12 anymore. I think about it as K-16 because it clearly has become the case that many people just go to college and they just continue the same kind of routine formal learning that they had in their previous primary education and secondary education. And that means that basically I'm learning things that other people think I have to know. And so what you are doing then is, of course, memorizing the things that are important to somebody else, your teachers, right, your textbook authors, and so on. And then you are given an exam at the end of some type of a term. So there's no individualization here, right? Everybody has the same term, whether I learn quickly or learn, more in a more slow fashion. I'm going to be in the same term and I'm going to have the exam at the exact same time as you. And so therefore we're set up to believe that, in fact, life is all about getting ready for some exam. And we never, and of course, those are our formative years. If you think about it, they're grabbing kids now as young as 3 years old and they're sticking them in this system. And you stay in that system until you're 22, 23 years old. And then you finally graduate. And how do you graduate? You take a final exam, right? And now you're launched into the world. You have no idea how to be creative. You have no idea how to direct your own learning. You have no idea how to innovate with other human beings and solve problems and blend your perspectives of the world with theirs. All you know is that there's some authority somewhere that knows everything exactly as it needs to be known, and I've got to figure that out. And so we go through our entire lives thinking that maybe at the end, as we go and to the the pearly gates, that maybe there's going to be an exam there that we have to pass. And so we have. So it's almost like you can't even imagine that we could think of it any other way, because we are so routinely acculturated according to that paradigm, right? And scholars have pointed this out. I had a great teacher when I was at the University of Minnesota, Arthur Harkins, who was a futurist, and Arthur passed away a few years ago, but he was a very, very forward thinker with respect to education and innovation and how it was that K-12 was really kind of making it very difficult for individuals to break out of the mold, and we have special programming for some, we call them gifted and talented children and so on. But then we have to transition to the next phase of being an adult, a mature learner, where you are now taking learning into your own hands and controlling as best you can, and self-engineering the future of your own learning. And we don't teach people how to do that, and we never do.
So looking at what you listed as being components of that intellectual character, the virtues that develop that over time: courage, humility, inquisitiveness, reflection, curiosity, and hope. Is there one of those out of the list today that we can focus on and just talk a little bit more about what does that look like as you put positive action
Right.
into the world, what does it do for you to stay on that path over time?
Right.
How can it help others, like in
Right.
organizations? If we could just pick one, let's,
Yeah.
kind of zone in on that.
Well, I'll say this: the central virtue is reflection, and to understand how to develop the capacity to reflect is huge. Is huge part of your transformation, human transformation. And so I do want to spend a lot of time on that. But recently, I've been writing about intellectual humility, and so I'll focus on that today. And so what I've discovered in my work is that intellectual humility, in fact, is the basis of all learning. And if you think about it, Kate, right? So we all go through life with certain beliefs that that we don't mind changing. They're on the periphery. They're right, and it's like, oh, I thought my keys were over there, but no, they're over here. And that's not a big deal to change that belief, right? I mean, it's just like, okay, that's easy. But then we have more central beliefs that are really at the core of what we think of as our personal self or our personal identity. And these might revolve around things like your religious commitments, maybe around your political commitments. And it certainly today, almost everything is politicized and people are taking sides. And of course, they dig in and they call each other names. And they absolutely have no way of talking to one another in a way that that resembles any kind of civil discourse. I mean, it's just insane. So intellectual humility says, even those beliefs that I have deep down in my soul that I truly don't want to challenge, nonetheless, they are contingent. They are things that are it's just my approach to the world. And there are other people that might have vastly different approaches that are not in any way consistent with the way I look at the world. And yet at the same time, I don't have any kind of special conduit to God or truth or something that makes me somehow imperial to their perspective. It's just another way of being a human being, right? And if you have some dose of humility, you're able at least to entertain the idea that other people might approach the world from a different perspective. Now, you can disagree in a deep and fundamental way with that, but we also need to understand that human belief change is something that happens intergenerationally. And so when you look back at the history of ideas, and the fact that human beings used to think that the sun revolved around the earth, and it's like, well, why wouldn't you believe that? Every element of your senses would tell you that the sun, oh, it's coming up over there, and now it's going over, and then it's going down. So clearly the sun goes around the earth, right? So you can't even point to the science or the evidence, because the best that you can say is, this is the evidence that we have today, right? And so the belief that the sun revolved around the earth was a very effective belief for a certain period of time. But also, and here comes Copernicus, and he goes, well, wait a minute now. It doesn't square with some of these other things that we know about the universe. And lo and behold, he turned out, at least as we believe it today, he was correct. And anybody that's anti-Copernican today is going to be like, So the humility, the ability to accept, which is not an easy thing to do, the ability to accept that even your most cherished fundamental beliefs may are in fact contingent and just a function of where you are in life, the kinds of narratives you've been exposed to in your life, the kinds of things that you've read in your life, and so on. And that you can be open to changing them, even if it's just refining them on the margins. And I was talking about theology the other day with somebody, and it's so funny that I think that if you're a scholar in theology, you probably have the worst job in the world, because nobody's going to read you except other theologians. Why? It's because the people that do have some type of a religious belief have only one book that they're going to read. And any book that might sort of make nuanced interpretations of that one basic book, they don't want to challenge that, right? So so theology has got the hardest job in the world of popularizing their work, because people don't want to challenge that single book that they take to be the center of their life, right? So even there, belief change on the margins, nuance, subtleties, and so on, can make you a better human being, even in your deepest theological beliefs, right? Which are generally the ones that are most deeply held by human beings. And then humility also plays a role, in terms of intellectual curiosity, right? So if you are have humility, that means that when you're reading and you're studying and you're trying to maybe improve yourself, that from time to time you can go pick up a book that is going to challenge your beliefs and take you in a whole direction that you had no idea. And it's painful. And believe me, I've done it many times. And it's amazing how stressful that can be. And so we need to develop that capacity to honor that anxiety as a function of our living system's desire to become better. That's really what it is. Whoops. And finally, I'll say the following. So intellectual humility is both individual, in the sense that it is the basis of all my learning, but it's also social. So I think many people have been in meetings where people come into a meeting and they've got their perspective, and this is my perspective. I think this is how we should tackle these problems. This is the strategy we should have, and so and we all have that. We all feel strongly about certain things, but in a social setting, right? As we we can still be humble and have intellectual humility and be assertive. So I assert my position, but at the same time, I can be open to perhaps modifying that position by listening to what other people have to say. And you get this collective sense making that happens when people collectively share in some level of intellectual humility. And it's vitally important today that organizations adopt a sort of a paradigm of intellectual humility, and managers and leaders might in fact even be counseled when they go into an important strategy meeting or whatever to say, look, remember folks, we practice intellectual humility in this company. And so therefore I want to hear all your ideas in a very strong fashion, but recognize that what results and the decision that we take might be a blend of everybody's position.
I like that example. That's really helpful. As we're wrapping up today's show, if I'm listening and I want to learn more about building out my intellectual character, especially my intellectual humility, do you have any recommendations of where to learn more?
Yes, I do. And of course, I'm going to take you in a nerdy direction here for a moment. I think one of the most important books of the 20th century is Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It's not a difficult read. What he basically did was he realized that all scientific ideas and all scientific theories are historical, and they arise in a historical context. And every now and then we have periods where there's very little rancor, very little discord within a science. Those are periods of what he calls normal science. And everybody accepts the prevailing theories as being correct. And then all of a sudden somebody comes along and realizes that it doesn't, there's, the theory, it doesn't, the experiments that are being done don't harmonize with other kinds of things that we're understanding about the world. And they have a period of what they call revolutionary science, where somebody comes along and says, well, we need to look at the world in a different way. And of course, Copernicus was such a revolutionary scientist, where everybody said, well, no, of course, the sun goes around the earth. Well, he pointed to different things and asked different questions than people were currently asking. I'm saying that dogmatism is almost a natural function of our K-16 education. You can't help it. Because we haven't been trained to think differently about the world and to entertain different perspectives just to see where they take you, and so you can see that intellectual humility has a strong corollary with intellectual courage, because in order for me to be able to look at different perspectives and paradigms, I have to have the courage to do that, right? And so that's one way that you can begin to extract yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. D. Any other parting words for the day?
No, I just wish everybody, a great week and continue to build your intellectual character. I think there's so much yet for us to do to communicate this message to folks. And I truly am truly honored to be a part of this movement that is going to hopefully find its way into education at all levels, and then help people really create their own intellectual character over the entire path of their lifetimes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.